Adam Schuster, he is Director of Budget and Tax Research for Illinois Policy, illinoispolicy.org. Adam, good morning to you.
Morning, Riley. Thanks for having me on.
I'm glad to hear from you once again. And I tell people so often, get over to illinoispolicy.org. I'm telling you, it is a super comprehensive website. You want to know what's going on in this state from people who know what they're talking about, people who are not afraid to take a stand, but at the same time, then offer up alternatives and suggestions. Illinois Policy is just your spot. And one of the things that everybody's been talking about, of course, is where are we going with this this progressive tax, and what's it going to do to us? Namely, how's it going to affect your average listener here in Rockford, Adam?
Well, yeah, so the progressive income tax requires a constitutional amendment, I think, as a lot of people know by this point.
Sure.
That means it has to pass with 3/5 majorities in both houses. And most recent news is that it did pass through the Senate on a party line vote after a whole 7 minutes of grueling debate.
So that means they really got into the niches on this one to really discover everything they could.
Yeah, we'll talk about it longer here, I bet, than they did on the Senate floor. But yeah, so now it moves on to the House. And the good news is this is by no means a sure thing to pass the House. There are a lot of, I would say sort of relatively fiscally conservative Democrats that are sort of in the suburbs and downstate who so far have not agreed to vote to put this thing on the ballot. There's a few of them who are kind of kicking the can and they're saying, oh, well, it's up to the people to decide because it's going to go to the ballot. It's going to be people's choice. But notice that they're not letting you decide on pension reform or term limits or fair maps, right? They're the ones who get to decide which initiatives make it to the ballot and don't. So they're making a conscious decision if they're voting yes on this. As for what it would mean for your listeners, this means more power for politicians to hike your taxes. I mean, that's the simplest way of looking at this debate, because a flat tax means that it's very politically difficult to raise taxes because you have to raise them on everybody at the same time. And as soon as that's no longer the case, as soon as that protection is out of the Constitution, they can pick and choose different income groups. They can play with the brackets and play with the rates, and it makes it easier for them to eventually hike them on everybody.
And, of course, the hue and cry is always, let's soak the rich, let's tax the rich. They're not paying enough. But sooner or later, the rich, like we've seen in New York and other states, and California in particular, are going to get tired of it and move on.
You're asking about, California and New York and driving people out of the state.
Right.
And that's absolutely the case. That's absolutely what happens. You hike people's taxes and more of them leave. I mean, this is very clearly established in economics literature and, the data from the Census Bureau. It's absolutely not a debatable question, despite the fact that they're trying to say that doesn't happen. But it's not just rich people. Really what we have to look at is how this is going to affect small businesses. And at least 25% of small businesses would be hit by the rate increase that the governor has proposed currently, and about 75% of small business income, because a lot of small businesses make over $250,000, which is where he currently wants to start the tax hikes. And they're taxed at the individual income tax rate. They have their pass-through entities, and that means it's going to be harder for these small businesses who create about 2/3 of new jobs in the state of Illinois to create jobs for people. And that means they're less likely to come here. They're less likely to hire here. And if people can't find job opportunities, that means that the working class and the middle class are also more likely to leave for other states.
So in a state that leads the Midwest in outbound migration and is in the top 2 or 3 nationally in outbound migration, this does not seem to be the shot in the arm that we would need to stem that.
No, absolutely not. I mean, the trend among other states is to go towards lower and flatter taxes. The states that are neighboring Illinois are cutting their income taxes, and more states have actually switched from graduated or progressive tax schemes to flat taxes in recent years. So it's Utah, North Carolina, and Kentucky have switched to flat taxes. Only one state has gone in the opposite direction from flat to progressive, and that would be Connecticut back in 1996. It's the most recent state to make the switch, and it's been terrible for them. All of the promises that are being made in Illinois were also made in Connecticut. They said it would lower property taxes. They said the middle class would get a cut, and they said it would balance the budget. And in fact, they broke every one of those promises. Property taxes continue to increase. The middle class has seen their income tax burden increase by 13% since the switch, because again, this just means it's easier for politicians to hike your taxes, and they're still having the exact same budget problems they had before. They've had unbalanced budgets in 12 out of the last 15 years. And the thing I always say is, if tax hikes worked, why are we talking about another one? because we've done 2 in the last 8 years, and since those tax hikes, our out-migration problem has only gotten worse, our budget deficits have grown, and our debt has increased. So they're not going after the core of the problem, which is structural overspending. Our government is spending more than our taxpayers can afford to pay, and that's what they need to address.
And the current administration is really trying to shove that message out there. I'm looking at another piece up in Illinois Policy by your colleague Bryce Hill, a fair tax backer spreading falsehoods and misinformation about, how good this is going to be, and then alludes to this. Experts ranging from Nobel Prize winners to former Council of Economic Advisors to budget office directors and more. Textbooks widely used in college macroeconomics classes agree on the following. Higher taxes hurt economic growth. Higher marginal tax rates reduce small business employment, employee wages, and firm growth. All of those things are things that Illinois needs to eradicate.
Yeah, absolutely. And the lies about this thing are just ridiculous. I mean, they're going out there saying, there's one person in particular, I don't know if I need to name him, but Ralph Martiri from the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability, he keeps making this claim that not a single peer-reviewed study shows that taxes hurt the economy. That's not only not true, it's literally the opposite. There is a wide, broad consensus among professional economists. And like you just mentioned in that piece, it includes former economic advisors to Presidents Obama and Clinton, people who are on the left, they're left of center.
Yep.
And they all agree that tax hikes do harm the economy, and in particular, they drive people to leave from high tax states to low tax states. That's the last thing we need right now. But they're also using this claim that the vast majority of states have what they call a fair tax, and I'm using mental quotation marks for the term fair tax there. but it's very misleading. I mean, PolitiFact has already ranked that claim mostly false, because while it's true that 32 states have more than one bracket or more than one rate, so you could technically call them progressive income tax states, many of them are essentially flat tax states. So in 18 of the states that they're talking about, 18 out of the 32, the top rate kicks in below Illinois' median family income. And in 10 of them, it kicks in below $25,000. And my favorite one that they include on the list is Alabama. They're calling Alabama a fair tax state. Alabama's top rate kicks in at $3,000. Right? So they're not soaking the rich in Alabama. And so they're using a lot of very misleading claims to sell this to the people. And when politicians are doing it and mislead to try to get you to vote for something, you should be very wary.
Yes, and the fact that there's not a lot of, there are some, but there are not a lot of places out there that are sticking swords in what this guy is saying, and some of these statements that he's making that can be proven to be, absolutely falsehoods. You're not seeing a lot of people going after it. I'll credit Kristen McQuarrie over at the Tribune for taking a good, solid slam at it. You guys at Illinois Policy are always on this sort of thing because, well, it's what you do. But they're not getting the pushback that I think that, well, if it were another party in charge, that they would be getting. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think there is some media awareness of this. We've actually been doing meetings with editorial boards to try to explain what our research shows. I mean, it's really just they're running a disinformation campaign, and so we're trying to run an information campaign. And I think you have seen some people come out and start to realize that this means more power for Illinois politicians to raise taxes, because they've actually started admitting that. Originally, we saw backers of this plan saying things like, well, we can hike taxes right now. Right, but they realize how difficult it is, because there was huge turnover after the 2017 tax. Like, a bunch of representatives lost their seats because people were so mad about it.
Sure.
And that's why it's a protection. But now there's backers. I was on Chicago Tonight, WTTW, with Daniel Biss debating the merits of this proposal, and he said that the fair tax is handcuffs for the state of Illinois. And I said, thank goodness that they have some form of handcuffs, some form of fiscal restraint, so that they don't have to, so that they can't come back and hike our taxes every time is the only answer. And so it's true. They're saying it's handcuffs, and I'm saying I agree, and we should keep them in place.
And as we look at the fates of several of our chief executives, handcuffs seems to be a real apt way of putting things, too.
Yeah, it's different form of handcuffs for sure.
But the thought remains. Yeah, it's an ongoing thing. It's one of those things to pay attention to. Let your representative know how you feel about things and learn more by getting over to IllinoisPolicy.org to learn more. Adam, unfortunately, I'm out of time. I really, as always, appreciate the info. I appreciate the expertise and you taking time out of your day for us.